West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Let's bring in now Ambassador Michael Mcfaul, who, of course, served as U.S. Ambassador to Russia during the Obama administration. Ambassador Mcfaul, thank you for being with us. I want to get your reaction to what we heard tonight from the president. Was there anything that you heard there that surprised you? Is there anything in that speech that you think may make a material difference in terms of what happens next?
Well, my biggest surprise was to see Democrats and Republicans standing up together and applauding. Rachel, we haven't seen that for a long time. That's an interesting thing that Putin has done to unite us on that. We weren't united just 2 weeks ago, even with respect to how to deal with Putin. That was very interesting to me. And both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, by the way, were divided. We're not. That's a good sign. Second, I think he said the right things in the general framing of the issue. This is a fight between autocracy and democracy. Those kinds of framing, I think, is right. I would have liked a little more detail on that. I think explaining to the American people why this matters to us, why the fight in Ukraine matters not just for democracy and freedom in Ukraine, but Europe and ultimately for us. He said it. He said a sentence. He said, we got to stop dictators now before they go further. But I think just a couple more paragraphs would have been appropriate. I also liked what he said about the oligarchs. That got an applause line, seize the yachts of the oligarchs. But I think we need to get into some detail here, Rachel. And I'm not sure you're going to let me do it right now, but maybe another time, because you know a lot about this, and we should interview you about this. I'm remembering a book called Blowout. And that is to say, not all oligarchs are alike. We just keep throwing this term around as if they're all a bunch of rich people and they all live in London and they're all close to Putin. It's not true. Some oligarchs live in London and have yachts there, and Putin hates them. And some oligarchs don't live in London. They run the oil and gas companies, and we're not seizing their assets. And they want those other assets of those oligarchs to be seized. So it's the right thing to do. I support sanctions. They're putting a lot of pressure on the Russian society. I just think we got to be careful about how we talk about how these kinds of things will actually impact Putin and his decision making. It's not so clear cut the way it works. Yeah, it needs to be done careful if it's going to have the impact that it's intended to have. Surgically. Yes.
Ambassador Mcfaul, I want to press you on what you heard in what was really the most soaring part of the speech, lifting up President Zelensky, who is right now the world's most visible freedom fighter, and his people. But the president has so consistently declassified intelligence about what is to come, and hauntingly, he's been correct. And so I want to ask you what we should read into this part of the speech. The president said this: "We remain clear-eyed. The Ukrainians are fighting back with pure courage, but the next few days, weeks, and months will be hard on them. Putin has unleashed violence and chaos, but while he may make gains on the battlefield, he will continue to pay high price over the long run." Is the president, what is he saying? What should we hear?
I heard a couple of things there. It's a great thing to focus on. One is, remember, Putin initially started with the kind of shock and awe. He thought the Ukrainians would run. He thought Zelensky would be in Poland by now, and then he could just roll in and everybody would be happy and greet him happily. That didn't work. And you saw the anger in Putin's voice just a couple of days ago when he put his nuclear forces on alert. If you're winning the war, you don't make threats like that, right? So now we're moving to a different phase. And for me, it's a very familiar phase. It's what he did in Chechnya. It's what he did in Grozny in Chechnya, the capital there. It's what he did in Aleppo in Syria after they invaded there with his Air Force in 2015, which is going to be, and you've already seen it in Kharkiv, and it feels like it's coming in Kiev, where they're going to use massive military power with lots of civilians dying, and Putin doesn't care because he thinks by terrorizing the civilians, he will be able to take control. And I think the president was warning us about that.
What happens next?
Well, the Ukrainians are going to fight. I was just exchanging messages with a close friend of mine in Kiev who knows the president well, President Zelensky, and we are talking about those options. And one of the things we discussed was, would it be worse or better if President Zelensky was alive in Lviv or arrested or killed in Kiev? And we were strategizing. And then my friend at the end of this said, but Mike, he's not leaving. So we can talk about all we want, but he's going to stay there and fight. And if they fight and they maintain some resistance, maybe there's a chance for a negotiated settlement. Maybe Xi Jinping comes in and helps. But that's not what I predict. My prediction is going to get very nasty, and it's going to be very tragic. And then we're going to feel even more what I feel today is it's great to be unified. It's great that NATO's together. It's great that we're supplying the Ukrainians. We should be supplying more, by the way, more weapons, more Stingers, more Javelins now. That's what I hear from Ukrainians on the ground. But when this assault comes, we're all going to be unified watching as the Ukrainians fight. And that's going to be a very tragic moment. It's going to be a very uncomfortable moment for us.
It is Wednesday, the 2nd of March of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. And what a day for it! Speaking of which, how is your day? Did you enjoy the State of the Union? I actually thought Joe gave a rousing speech. The Republicans, well, look, so many of them are still on Vlad's side, even though it seemed for a moment there was a bipartisan agreement in which to condemn Vlad. Well, if not to condemn Vlad, at least to stand for the Ukrainians. It's quite shocking, actually. Especially when Kim from Iowa gave the rebuttal. And how it made it sound like the Republicans are the only ones backing the Ukrainians, when there was Republicans who were responsible for asking Zelensky to do them a favor, though. The leader of your party is bribing the leader of another country by withholding military aid that was on its way. And now you're saying, oh, we have to stand by the Ukrainians from this brutal dictator, Vladimir Putin. Yeah, well, why were so many people in your caucus over there on the 4th of July? Jeez. It wasn't Joe brokering some sort of deal with Vlad to build a hotel in Moscow. Please. Well, that was only part of the problem. Because then we also had, and I love this, I think it was Annalie on Daily Kos who coined Marjorie Taylor Greene and Berbert. Berbert. Heckle and Jekyll. Now, while I was watching the State of the Union, I heard some sort of clamoring, but it was, the C-SPAN camera, because that's what is there, was focused on Joe at the podium. And a couple of times showed some members in the gallery. I mean, I'm pretty sure that was the C-SPAN feed camera. If not, so be it. But there was some sort of ruckus going on. But the camera didn't turn to those two. We only know it later because of other photographs and video that was posted on social media of those two, Heckle and Jekyll. And when Joe was bringing up veterans' benefits for diseases, cancers, that may have come about because of depleted uranium burn pits. Sometimes a couple of football fields long. 3 football fields big. When he mentioned Bo, his son, who had died of brain cancer, and speculated that possibly it was because of his close proximity to burn pits in Sarajevo and in Iraq. Or whatever theater it was. I don't think it was Afghanistan. I think it was Iraq. Heckle and Jekyll heckled him while bringing up his dead son. Now, this is par for the course for maggots. I made mention of my experience on social media, or not my experience, but I made known my experience posted on social media about an interaction on Facebook when I had posted an essay on the anniversary of my son's passing, which is a nice way of saying he died of a heart ailment at the age of 41. Undisclosed, at least to his mom and I. He prepared the kids. But I was hammered. I was insulted. I was even blamed by some QAnon maggot types for killing my son. Not only blaming me for his death, but that I killed him. And when I said F off, and I'm sorry I used the UCK also, but hey, I thought it warranted it, I was suspended by Facebook for bullying. After I'd been spammed by scores and scores of these ghouls mocking me. Oh, he probably doesn't even have a son. Why would he bring up his dead son? I wrote an essay. But because apparently having feelings for another human being, your loved one, your offspring, makes you weak, a loser. The world hates a loser. So therefore the world hates America because Joe cares about Bo. Of course, there is a picture of that I posted before of Trump on the stairs going up to Air Force One, and he's holding an umbrella above himself in the rain, and his son Barron is behind him in a polo shirt, short-sleeve polo shirt, getting pelted by big raindrops in the rain, and Dad won't hold the umbrella over the kid. Well, we've seen that with he and Melania, too. He holds it over him, but he doesn't let her get underneath the umbrella. Oh, no, don't get too close. How'd those guys make a kid? Well, I can imagine. I don't want to, but I can imagine it. So the idea of actually having true unconditional feelings for another, even your offspring, is considered a weakness by that group. That's why I call them Nazis. Now, I was reminded that someone like Greg Abbott, who I've called a Nazi, is not really a Nazi. He's not a card-carrying Nazi. I like your enthusiasm, but you know, calling him a Nazi is just too far, going too far. Of course, Greg Abbott, for instance, is a bigoted, homophobic, white nationalist. And, I don't know, I call those people Nazis for short. He's a fascist. Unfeeling. All right. So I'm still wondering, how is it that Joe has 37%? Now, I heard the numbers have bumped up a bit, but 37% popularity, or doing a good job as he went into the State of the Union speech. 37%. How is that? I'll tell you how that is. A robust propaganda machine. More jobs created in the history. Even FDR didn't create that many jobs. I think I looked that up, and I thought that's pretty close. And if you listen to Kim from Ohio, oh my God, the streets look like the streets of Kharkiv. All this death and destruction by crime, and Joe Biden's the blame for it. Our economy is dumped. We know what he's paying people not to work. And this is the woman who gave unemployment benefits to workers who didn't want to get the vaccine. Please. Talks about parental choice. We want to know what our kids are reading so you can burn the books that my kids are reading? F you, you Nazi. Jeez. Oh, they're not card-carrying Nazis? I'm sorry. They're bigoted, homophobic, white nationalist fascists, and I call them Nazis for short. I'm tired of it. No more equivocating. By their actions, they show us who they are, and they are Nazis. Right down to their little goose-stepping all over the memory of Beau Biden. And laughing about it. Having a great old time. And apparently Joe is unpopular because they know how to lead. The other side will keep us safe. Bull. Do not negotiate with Nazis. You punch a Nazi, and after you're done punching the Nazi, you gotta punch him again. Once is not enough. Nazism is rust. Rust never sleeps. You gotta work every day to rub that rust out. It is corrosive. If you ignore it, it will destroy the very underpinnings of the ship of state. We've ignored it for too long. Called it everything but what it is. Right-wing extremism. They're Nazis. Jesus. Okay. Can you tell I'm in a peak? Because people are dying in a war that doesn't need to be fought. And the only reason Vladimir Putin waited this long to attack Ukraine is because he was counting on Trump getting a second term so Trump would just hand over the Ukraine. That didn't happen. Then he had to go to Plan B for Biden. But there was a reason why Vladimir Putin did not want Joe Biden as president of the United States in these times. 37% approval because apparently, according to Kim from Iowa, the rest of the world doesn't respect Joe or the United States. They only respect power. Yeah, we saw what happened in Helsinki. We saw those photographs and that body language, and we still have not seen the translator notes. Joe Biden rallied the world. Sweden and Switzerland, who were neutral during World War II, Hitler couldn't bring them out of neutrality. But Vladimir Putin has, and that is because of Joe Biden's insistence that the world band together and isolate Vladimir Putin. This is not about making the Russian people suffer, and I'm sorry they have to. But the tens of thousands who are going into the street at risk of being labeled terrorists and imprisoned as such, have been taking to the streets even before our sanctions were even thought of being implemented. There was only one party who was able to get brainwashed by Vladimir Putin. Let us not forget, Russian spies infiltrated the National Republican Committee, the NRA, and their major funders. Let's not forget about the guy from Overstock.com, who was also, with that Red Sparrow Butina. She's an elected official now. Served her 15 months here in various federal institutions. And then went back to Russia as a hero. And is now an elected official in the Duma. One party, the Republican Party, did the bidding of Russian spies to the point where they went to the Republican platform and changed it in the dead of night, unbeknownst to anybody else, to say, we're not giving arms to Ukraine, after the treaty had already been passed. One party is responsible for that. Okay, what's on the rest of the menu here? Because we have curated a show for you. Yes, we have. It's not all rant. It only sounds like it. Anyway, as we started off, seizing oligarchs' property may be trickier than it sounds, but thank God we have Joe Biden as President of the United States. Thank God. Or, I don't know, thank the 80-some-odd million who are apparently, according to Chuck Todd, we're not a loyal base. 80-some million. I don't know. Okay. Thanks, Chuck. On the rest of the menu, Texas has begun investigating the parents of transgender youth for child abuse. And they call wearing a mask tyranny. Utah lawmakers passed new media restrictions despite wide-ranging opposition. And those are new media restrictions for their House floor. And a judge overturned a Washington state legislature-approved capital gains tax on high-profit stocks, bonds, and other assets, ruling that is an unconstitutional tax on income. What? After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Russian authorities have threatened to block Wikipedia's Russian language site over an article that mentions deaths among Ukrainian civilians. And non-Ukrainians, also fleeing the war, are reporting mistreatment at border checkpoints. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by the Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of the chat room link, across the page near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to our Patreon site. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, and if you could afford to send us what you might spend on, how about an espresso-type coffee drink, for instance? If you could afford to send those funds to us once a month, we are able to stretch those dollars beyond compare, even in these inflationary and perilous times. Pay our bills, fly under the radar, and continue this powerhouse of resistance against you-know-who. Well, dark forces arrayed against not only the United States of America, but representative democracy worldwide. We are a bulwark against that. Small we be, mighty we are. Indeed. And we owe that to you and your generosity in allowing us to be this powerhouse of resistance for going on 11 years. Continuous, 24/7, 365. Resistance Radio. Thank you for your generosity. And thank you for your generosity in the future, near and distant. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thank you, Tom. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. It's man spelled backwards, all right? Putnam. Because we're the higher class of putts. At least that's what we were told. Anyway, follow me at Justice Putnam on Twitter. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes about 10 minutes before showtime. Hopefully I can do that, but I try. Anyway, I put that up on Twitter and other social media platforms. The show notes and links, of course, are where you're going to link up to the real reportage. Sans all the add-ons that we add on. But that's why we do it. Anyway, follow me there and you'll get the show notes and links. And you can also follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West. And please pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. And the deep archive of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy shows can be found at the Internet Archive at archive.org. I was looking over the geolocation of people who've been picking up podcasts, and we picked up not only Russia itself, but a lot of the former Soviet Union. I think people are starved for information in any way they can get it. Well, we are a salon, and, that's kind of big in Europe. I know Russia isn't quite Europe, but there's a lot in the former Soviet Union that do consider them European. It's always been a dynamic, even during Catherine the Great. Why do you think she became Catherine the Great? I'm going to send my people to London. Have a little sit down. Tea cakes and tea. Okay, well, we do have as I mentioned earlier, a curated show. So why don't we get into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And this first offering comes out of the Associated Press by Lawrence DeMilo. The parents of a transgender teenager in Texas said in a lawsuit filed yesterday, Tuesday, that the state is investigating them after Republican Greg Abbott, and he's the governor, of course, ordered officials to look into reports of gender-confirming care for kids as child abuse. The parents of a 16-year-old girl are asking a judge to block the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services from investigating them and the parents of other transgender youth under a directive Abbott issued last month. Is this some sort of X-Men screenplay? Are they pitching this as an X-Men movie? Is this part of the Marvel universe? I'm wondering. I just got to tell you, Abbott looks like one of these mad scientist types. He's not even a scientist. He's just an evil. I mean, Lex Luthor was more of a scientist than this guy. And Lex Luthor was part of the DC universe. Just saying. The actions caused terror and anxiety among transgender youth and their families across the Lone Star State, and singled out transgender youth and their families, the lawsuit filed by the ACLU and Lambda Legal. The lawsuit marks the first report of parents being investigated following Abbott's order and an earlier non-binding legal opinion by Republican Attorney General and this guy, he's still under indictment. He's a criminal. Attorney General Ken Paxton, labeling certain gender-confirming treatments as child abuse. DFPS, which last week said it did not have any open cases, said Tuesday it had received 3 reports since Abbott's directive and Paxton's opinion, but would not say how many resulted in investigations. The agency declined to comment on the suit. The governor's office did not immediately respond to a request for comment because they're Nazis. They don't need to answer to anybody. The lawsuit does not name the parents, but said the mother works at DFPS on the review of reports of abuse and neglect. The day of Abbott's order, she asked her supervisor how it would affect the agency's policy according to the lawsuit. The lawsuit said the mother was placed on leave because she has a transgender daughter, and the following day was informed her family would be investigated in accordance with the governor's directive. Abbott's directive and the Attorney General's opinion go against the nation's largest medical groups, including the AMA, which have opposed Republican-backed restrictions filed in state houses nationwide. Arkansas last year became the first state to pass a law prohibiting gender-confirming treatments for minors, and Tennessee approved a similar measure. A judge blocked Arkansas's law, and the state is appealing. The Texas teen, who has received puberty-delaying medication and hormone therapy, has been traumatized by the prospect of being separated from her parents and losing her care, the lawsuit said. The stress has taken a noticeable toll on her, and her daughter, who is typically joyful and happy, is now moodier, stressed, and overwhelmed, the mother said in a declaration filed with the complaint, almost as if the governor of Texas and the Texas state itself are guilty of child abuse. The plaintiffs include a licensed psychologist who the lawsuit said would be put in a untenable situation by putting her at risk of losing her license and other penalties if she does not report clients who receive gender-affirming care to the state. In other words, Abbott wants the Stasi quo. Metz of the AP brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. The Utah House of Representatives approved new rules on Tuesday yesterday that limit where members of the press can film and interview lawmakers, following similar action taken by the Utah Senate 2 weeks ago. The rules extend pandemic-era restrictions on when journalists can report from the floors of state legislative chambers as they're trying to take everybody's mask off. Journalists covering the Utah legislature must now ask for permission to interview lawmakers on the floor of the House of Reps and other restricted areas. TV reporters must ask committee chairs for permission to film speakers and crowds from behind the dais, where lawmakers sit in committee hearings. I know that sometimes committee members get a little bit nervous from the cameras right behind them because they can see their screens. You mean when they're not paying attention or actually read what they're trying to say and are lying about it? And that was by Republican Representative Timothy Hawks. Media organizations and journalists covering the State House oppose the rules in the Utah House and Senate, arguing that restricting media movements would make it more difficult to cover fast-paced action and make it easier for lawmakers to dodge the press. They said the move reduced transparency, a claim the lawmakers denied. Sure. Utah Media Coalition lobbyist Renee Cowley-Lobb proposed an alternative, telling lawmakers that credentialed members of the media were working on establishing a formal press corps that could work with lawmakers to refine the rules in a mutually satisfactory way. She proposed creating a commission with 2 members of the press and designees from the House, Senate, and state legislative officials to govern press rules, similar to the method used in Utah courthouses. As you can tell, by doing simple math, the committee would already be stacked in favor of the government, but it does offer the media and members of the press the opportunity to be a part of some of the decisions made regarding their practice and their profession. Oh, you mean in a confrontation sort of way? Outside of Utah's Republican-led state house, similar restrictions have been passed in Iowa and Kansas. The new limits come in an environment of increasing attacks on the media and parallel new restrictions placed on journalists covering protests and courtroom proceedings. They also come as U.S. states and cities loosen coronavirus restrictions that have returned restaurants, sporting events, and offices to pre-pandemic capacity, but they want to make sure the press remains muzzled. Rachel LaCourte of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here on the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A judge has overturned a new capital gains tax on high-profit stocks, bonds, and other assets that was approved by the Washington legislature last year, ruling that it is an unconstitutional tax on income. Why? Did they dig a ditch for it? In his written decision, Douglas County Superior Court Judge Brian Huber agreed with opponents of the new tax who had argued it was a tax on income that violates previous state Supreme Court rulings and the state constitution because it is not a uniform taxation on property. Huber cited several elements of the law that he said showed the hallmarks of an income tax rather than an excise tax, including a reliance on federal IRS tax returns that must be filed by Washington residents. The fact that it is levied annually instead of at the time of the transaction, and that it is based on an aggregate calculation of capital gains over the course of a year. The state characterizes the new statute as a tax that applies on the sale or transfer of property and argues that such taxes are excise taxes, he wrote, but, as noted above, the new tax is not levied upon the sale or transfer of capital assets. Instead, the new tax statute levies a tax on receipt and thus ownership of capital gains. Attorney General Bob Ferguson said his office would appeal to the state Supreme Court. The measure imposed a 7% tax on the sale of stocks, bonds, and other high-end assets in excess of $250,000 for both individuals and couples. It was projected to bring in about $415 million in 2023, the first year the state would see money from the tax. The legal challenge stems from 2 lawsuits that were later consolidated. You know, class action for them, but not for us. The first was filed last April by the Freedom Foundation, an Olympia-based conservative think tank. A month later, former Washington Attorney General Rob McKenna filed the second on behalf of state residents, including manufacturing business owners, investors, and the Washington State Farm Bureau. Supporters of the tax say that Washington, one of a handful of states with no income tax on wages, leans too heavily on its sales tax, disproportionately affecting those with less income. Well, that was a feature, not a bug. Retirement accounts, real estate, farms, and forestry were all exempt from the tax. Business owners were also exempt from the tax if they are regularly involved in running the business for 5 of the previous 10 years before they sell, own it for at least 5 years, and gross $10 million or less a year before the sale. Under the new law, taxpayers could deduct up to $100,000 a year from their capital gains if they made more than $250,000 in charitable donations in the same tax year. Something Huber cited in his ruling, noting that like an income tax and unlike an excise tax, the new tax statute includes a deduction for certain charitable donations the taxpayer has made during the tax year. Because the state wasn't set to see any revenue from the tax until next year, it does not affect the work being done by lawmakers on the state supplemental budget this year. Well. Let us now get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. This week, Love in the Second Degree. Most of the people who brought you Kenneth Branagh's 2017 adaptation of Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express reunited for his death on the Nile. Different editor, costume designer, and set decorators, but other than that, I rewatched Murder on the Orient Express to prep for Death of the Nile, and Express holds up to reviewing. In fact, if you can accept Branagh's interpretation of Detective Hercule Poirot and how Poirot has emotional and philosophical stakes in each story so that his character has an arc, then both movies should be what you want. Films that are so rich, nuanced, and fun that they become Sunday afternoon fare that you can watch again and again long after having learned who done it. At first, Nile felt a little too flashy to me, too frantic and light. But Branagh and screenwriter Michael Green need that because they need to establish the allure, the glory, and the power of both love and wealth, because those two things form the bedrock of everyone's emotions and motives. Branagh loves a moving camera, and the camera in Orient Express flew around like Superman, and at the time I thought it was just him saying, I've got to make all these interview scenes interesting. But now I wonder if he wasn't visually reflecting on how that mystery forced Poirot to adopt a different perspective. If that's true, then when Nile's camera frequently rises from murky watery depths, it comments on how resentment, envy, self-interest, and biting unrequited longing is the murky undercurrent of love. Because where Orient Express was about grief, Death on the Nile is about love. And considering how in the film, love wounds, tortures, and how lovers are disfigured, it's a little perverse for a Valentine's Day release, which I'm warped enough to appreciate. Two quick things. In Death on the Nile, like Express, Green delivers smart lines and great speeches, which so few films do these days. And if Gal Gadot is determined to wear the hell out of at least one fabulous gown per movie, I'm kind of okay with that. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Welcome to A Cup of Health with CDC, a weekly feature of the MMWR, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. I'm your host, Dr. Kathleen Dooling. Occasional aches and pains are an expected part of life, but for many people, pain is a constant companion. Dr. Chad Helmick is with CDC's National Center for Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion. He's joining us today to discuss ways to manage chronic pain. Welcome to the show, Chad.
Thank you.
Chad, how many people in the U.S. suffer from chronic pain?
In 2016, 50 million adults had chronic pain, which is pain on most or every day in the past 6 months. More interesting, though, is that 20 million people have high-impact chronic pain, which is chronic pain that also limits their work or life activities on most or every day in the past 6 months. This is a problem because chronic pain is associated not only with symptoms, but with anxiety and depression, reduced quality of life, and the risk of opioid problems.
What are the most common causes of chronic pain?
The most common causes generally relate to bones and joints, like low back pain and arthritis, but there are many other causes: headaches, sickle cell disease, fibromyalgia, surgery and injuries, and many, many others.
Is chronic pain more common in any particular group of people?
Yes, it occurs at all ages, but it's more common in older middle-aged adults and in the oldest 85 and older. It's also more common in women, poor people, and those who live in rural areas.
How is chronic pain treated?
Well, the first thing to do is to get a diagnosis, which can help guide treatment. But the thinking about chronic pain now is that it becomes a chronic disease by itself, regardless of the cause, and that can cause significant problems. The real goal in management is to have a manageable level of pain, not to get rid of all pain. There's several steps that can be taken, and these are sometimes difficult to do because of barriers to access. But it makes sense to do the simplest and safest things first. And these are non-drug steps. Things like physical activity. Walking is perfectly good to help reduce pain. Also, self-management education can give you some confidence in managing chronic pain when you're on your own. There's also physical therapy, occupational therapy, psychological therapy, better sleep, which usually means less alcohol, and seeing a chiropractor or getting biofeedback and massage. If that's not enough, non-opioid drugs like Tylenol or Motrin and Advil or naproxen or Aleve can help. If those don't work, then it's time to consider something stronger. Sometimes that's opioids, but there's not great evidence that opioids are good for long-term pain in most people.
Do you have any advice for people suffering from chronic pain?
Well, it's important to work with a variety of providers who are working together to help you. The goal, again, is manageable pain so you can live a productive life. This can include physical therapy, most people can walk, to treat any underlying depression or anxiety, and to avoid further injuries. Finally, the National Pain Strategy is laying out a strategic roadmap to improve pain management system in this country.
Where can listeners get more information about managing chronic pain?
Listeners can go to the NIH website, nih.gov, and type in National Pain Strategy.
Thanks, Chad. I've been talking today with Dr. Chad Helmick about ways to manage chronic pain. If you're experiencing daily pain, talk with your healthcare provider to ensure you have the correct diagnosis and know how to manage your condition. Until next time, be well. This is Dr. Kathleen Dooling for A Cup of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Welcome to 60 Second Civics from the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. Today we have the honor of speaking with actress and educator Dr. Vicki Ross Norris. Dr. Ross Norris, your family had an encounter with the police while driving through South Carolina at night. Can you tell us about that?
Well, one time we were coming back from South Carolina with the caravan, and we got pulled over by some police, and I felt this tension in the car, and my uncle was driving in our car. And so my father told my uncle, don't say anything. Let me handle it. So the police officer, then another car came up, and my uncle rolled the window down, and he said the N-word, where you coming from, in? And my father's got into this Southern dialect, and he was talking like I'd never heard him before. And he was saying, "Yes, a boss. Yes, miss. Yes, sir." And my father had to sublimate his humanity. The policeman made a statement like, "You're a good So get your back up north. So they followed us from South Carolina all the way to North Carolina. And we crossed the border. But to live in an environment where you're traveling and you have a pocket full of money, matter of fact, you have in the 40s, you have a bachelor's degree. Your wife has a bachelor's degree. Your brother-in-law is working on his medical degree, but you're subhuman. And you're taught that you can't do certain things because you are nothing but an N-word. This is not fictional. This is the part of America's culture. That's the ugly part of racism. When a group of people who have contributed so much have to be afraid to contribute even more.
It's been an honor speaking with you, Dr. Ross Norris. That's all for today's episode, 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1937. The Steelworkers Organizing Committee and U.S. Steel signed their first historic labor agreement. Previous efforts to organize steelworkers had failed due to the union-busting tactics of the steel mill owners. But in 1935, the passage of the National Labor Relations Act required owners to bargain in good faith with their workers. Armed with the protections of this act, the Congress of Industrial Organizations was determined to organize steel. The next year, the CIO set up an SWOC headquarters in downtown Pittsburgh, the heart of steel country. In fact, SWOC set up shop in the tallest building in Pittsburgh, the Grant Building. Many steel companies had offices in the handsome Grant Building, and the SWOC was taking the labor fight right to their doorstep. The Steelworkers Organizing Committee held rallies and sent organizers into the mill towns. They gathered 125,000 union cards in the effort. Their first big victory came when they announced a new agreement with U.S. Steel. The agreement included $5 a day for workers in northern mills, an 8-hour workday, overtime, seniority protections, a grievance procedure, and recognition of the Steelworkers Organizing Committee as the bargaining representative for the workers. Many across the country were shocked that U.S. Steel had sat down at the bargaining table. Despite this groundbreaking agreement, many of the smaller steel plants, known as Little Steel, refused to bargain with the Steelworkers Organizing Committee. 1937 was marked with bloody battles to unionize Little Steel. 10 workers in Chicago lost their lives. Yet, momentum was in the workers' favor. Finally, in 1941, Little Steel capitulated and came to the bargaining table. The Steelworkers Organizing Committee had won union rights for steelworkers across the country. In 1942, the SWOC disbanded and became the United Steelworkers of America.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 45 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high of around 62. Foggy conditions prevail at the moment, and we'll have just cloudy skies later on. Winds will be out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And then we'll have a low of about 42 tonight with periods of heavy rain, bringing about a quarter of an inch or more overnight. And winds will be light and variable. And then rain showers early tomorrow with overcast skies later in the day, high of about 50. And winds will be light and variable. And those rains tomorrow will bring another quarter to a third of an inch. Confirmed cases of coronavirus in Jackson County in the southern part of Oregon continue to rise. We are now at 420,039 confirmed cases, and our deceased have risen again, and we are now at 480, and they want us to take off our masks. I'm not. Pollen is rated as none right outside the window in Rogue River proper. The air quality index is good at 17 parts per million. Oh, that's pretty good. And the daytime UV index is in the upper ranges of the moderate range at level 4. Barometric pressure is currently holding steady at 30.08 inches. Visibility is down to 3/4 of a mile, and relative humidity is at 98%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Yes, I'll get it out. London is 47 with heavy rain showers. Paris is 55 and sunny. Rome is 55 and fair. Kyiv is 35 degrees with light snow and heavy bombardment. Kabul is 41 and clear of their bombardment, but they still have the Taliban to deal with. Hong Kong is 62 and mostly cloudy, and mostly under the yoke of the Chinese dictators telling them what to do. Tokyo is 47 and mostly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 70 and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 50 degrees and mostly cloudy. And New York is 45 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Anonymous staff at Reuters brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Russian authorities have threatened to block Wikipedia's Russian language site over an article that mentions deaths among Ukrainian civilians, as well as the Russian forces that have entered Ukraine, Russian Wikipedia said yesterday, Tuesday. In a tweet, it posted a picture of a notification from the Russian communications regulator informing it of a threat from state prosecutors to block the site over a Russian language article titled Russian Invasion of Ukraine 2022. Among the illegally distributed information the notice complained of were reports about numerous casualties among service personnel of the Russian Federation and also the civilian population of Ukraine, including children, end quote. Russia has not published any precise casualty figures for its own military, but says its losses have been far lower than those of Ukrainian forces.
Je te donne, c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Vanessa Guerra of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. People fleeing the war in Ukraine for the safety of European border towns include citizens of countries in Africa, Asia, and the Mideast, people whose lives have been upended along with those of Ukrainians, but who in some cases say they are experiencing mistreatment. At a refugee center set up in Bucharest, Romania's capital, some Indian citizens told the AP that Ukrainian border guards gave fellow Ukrainians priority in getting out of the country and attempted to physically push back non-Ukrainians. Poland's ambassador to the UN said refugees admitted from Ukraine on Monday morning alone represented 125 countries. Ukrainians naturally accounted for the vast majority, but Polish officials said refugees included at least 100 nationals each from Uzbekistan, Nigeria, India, Morocco, Kazakhstan, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Poland, Belarus, Iran, Turkey, Algeria, and Russia. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum.